All right. All right, we are recording. Let's switch it over. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of the Delineation. So you guys know me. I like to have some fun. I made a intro. Well, for number one, I hate podcast intro music. I don't know why. Maybe that's just a me thing, but I can't stand it. But I was like, well, maybe what if I put some type of intro in? And I made this up. However, I think it's really annoying, so I probably will never play it again. So anyway, just enjoy it.
Welcome to the Delineation, an astrology show with Cam White.
I hope the podcast people were able to hear that, but I will probably never play that again. Anyway, that's the cool intro I made. Anyway, hello. I also wanted to say as well, this podcast is now available on Apple. It's supposed to be on Spotify, but it's not showing up. I don't know what's up with that. That will eventually be taken care of, though. However, you can now actually listen to this on Apple Podcasts. So if you don't want all of the commercials in between, go ahead and check it out there. So I'm recording this on May 1st. It's Saturday, May 1st. It's like, what time is it? It's like 9:50. This is actually take 2. I had recorded the second episode. I had a lot of ideas, and my issue with it was that it was one of those things where it's like, I was only talking about it in my head, and then once I said it out loud, it was like, it sounded weird, and I was kind of thinking about it. Nothing wrong with anything that I said on the show. I just feel like I could definitely better hash out my ideas. So anyway, this is take 2 for the second episode, but I'm excited because it's, again, more stuff that I really want to talk about. I'm also still coming off of this full moon in Scorpio, and this is going to kind of really lead in the conversation here. But oh my God, that full moon in Scorpio, just like, if longtime followers of me will know that I have somewhat of a little bit of an aversion to water signs or water transits. It's just, I'm all fire and air, you know what I mean? Like, that water just kills the vibe. So I actually really enjoyed that full moon. I know that wasn't the same for all of you out there, but it was releasing. It was something deep, which I think was kind of needed. But it also makes me beg the question of, like, where you talk about, Mars in Cancer being, a malefic. Something I really wanted to talk about in this episode is, are malefics bad? Like, really? Well, there's a lot of things I want to get into. Real quick, too, just to finish this intro, shout out to all of the patrons that make this show possible. I'm going to eventually have a little thing to put up where I'll have everyone's names up. So in the meantime, I'm going to say everyone's names. Now, if you would like to support this show and hear me say your name in a way that's probably super wrong, go ahead and become a patron of the show at patreon.com/CamWhiteAstro. Anyway, shout out to the new $10 patrons who are now producers of the show: Jennifer, Leo, Astro, Lodi, Mark Kamiri, Sarah with an I, this one, Renault, Ty Thaw. I can't tell if it's an I or an L at the end of your last name. You comment on all my videos. I love you to death, but I don't know how to say your name right, and I'm sorry. But anyway, shout out to you. Shout out to Serena, Sandra, Brittany, Alexa, Henry, and Eileen. They are all patrons and the producers that help produce the show, so shout out to them. If you guys want early access to the podcast and other episodes that I do, make sure you go ahead and check out my Patreon link. You'll get all of that kind of good stuff. Anyway, to go back to this full moon, what I kind of really want to start with this episode is, I've been really just thinking about malefics. The bad boys, the bad transits, Mars and Saturn. And of course, I'm not arguing or saying that Mars and Saturn aren't bad, right? They are the representations of what we see is as uncomfortable or difficult in the chart, whether that's a natal chart or a transiting chart. Oh, excuse me. I'm not arguing that at all. But what I'm arguing is, just because something is necessarily bad or uncomfortable, or we don't necessarily want to go for it, is it inherently destructive? Is it inherently bad? Now, one of the qualities of Mars and Saturn is being destructive. Now, of course, Mars is going to represent heating, inflammation, severing, fights. Saturn is coldness. Saturn is isolation. they have destructive qualities. So good for Mars and Saturn, right? That's not what I'm trying to say here. I think what I'm trying to get to, I think, is with Mars and Saturn being about bad, right? What we might feel as uncomfortable. My question becomes, how do you quote unquote fix the badness? Or like, I guess when you're looking at like a chart, you know, how do you say, how do I fix this person? Like, not how do I fix this person's problem? How does this person fix their problems, right? Where's Mars at in their chart? Where's Saturn at in their chart? What are their issues? Because Mars and Saturn are going to help us identify those issues, right? Of course, all of the planets are going to help us identify a lot of different things, but Mars and Saturn are really going to be pretty much the most problematic stuff. However, when you get to like philosophy, this is something I quote all the time. In fact, I've quoted so much that I might even be wrong in it. But I'm pretty sure I'm not. I might have the names mixed up. Anyway, it's Socrates and Plato. Socrates, I'm pretty sure it was Socrates. This fool was like, okay, in life, there's growth, and then there's stability, and then there's decay. That's the cycles of life. And then Plato was like, no, that's not how life works. There is growth, and then there's decay. You're either growing or you're decaying, right? Now, what I also thought, so let's keep that idea in mind. And then, so this idea of, you know, if you're not growing, you're literally decaying, right? You're going to have planets like Venus and Jupiter also kind of represent growth in a way, right? Like Jupiter's literally going to show you what's expanding. My question is, though, where you also get into what growth looks like. Now, when you talk about like a tree growing, for example, that's physical growth. But when you talk about like character development, because this is the thing, this is what I've kind of noticed. There's this, I feel like sometimes we look at natal charts the same, like especially with the traditional people, and we're gonna talk a lot about the traditional people today. But I feel like the traditional people really look at like a lot of natal charts the same way they'd look at like a horary, and it's just not the same. Of course, Mars and Saturn is going to represent where things are kind of destructive in like a horary or election, but like in a natal chart, there's so much more nuance, right? It's not just like, oh, this is just bad and that's how it is forever. But if you're wanting, like, let's say you have, you know, Mars in, the second house, and you spend a lot of money. Let's say that's your problem, right? And you want to grow, right? Well, growth usually requires some type of discomfort, right? Like if you're not comfortable, if you're comfortable, you're not growing. You've heard that saying before, right? And that holds some truth, right? Don't get me wrong. Uncomfortable situations are uncomfortable. There's no denying that. However, it's usually in those moments where you're truly challenged, where you can actually level up and get through something, right? So when you talk about Mars and Saturn showing you where the problem is, I kind of almost look at Mars and Saturn as beneficial as to what's going to really help you get around the solution, get to the solution, right? Well, like, because for example, you know, Venus and Jupiter are great, and this is something Ryan Butler says a lot, Medieval Astrology Guide. You guys should check him out if you haven't. He's got a lot of really good content online that no one actually knows about. I feel like he doesn't not get any following. Anyway, Ryan Butler says this all the time, of like, Jupiter represents abundance, right? But you can have too much of a good thing. You can have too much of something, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? So that's just to paint the light of like, hey, the opposite is true. Jupiter, sometimes you can't have too much of a good thing. Sometimes Venus, it's like, sometimes you don't want certain things to be connected to you. Sometimes you don't want, you know, sometimes you want to be more active and not so leisurely in a sense, you know, maybe. But in a environment that completely assists you and that caters to you, you will not grow and you will therefore decay. Versus when you are met to a challenge and you are forced to, you're met with pressure, you're met with resistance, right? Like, think of muscle training, think of weight training. It's pretty much just all reps, right? You know, doing that, I do not know clearly I do not know the verbiage or the language around muscle building enough to actually explain what probably goes on. But your muscles rip up, right? It's resistance. It's building things stronger through that. So my question is, when you talk about Mars and Saturn, like, are bad things really bad? Like, this is where, okay, why is everything love and light? Like, my question is, how the fuck did we get here to this love and light bullshit where, and don't get me wrong, when I got really into spirituality, when I got really into astrology, I was very love and light. I came from a very dark place getting into this stuff, and that's kind of, I didn't use spirituality for escapism. However, I was literally looking for positivity in my life. So of course that's where I went with it. However, there's this attitude around negativity, for one, in the spiritual world, but we're not even going to talk about them because they have their own issues. But I feel like in the astrology community that blends over. And I've thought a lot about this blending in, and I really wanted to distinct it for people. Because again, what I really want to do with the show is just talk about shit, right? I don't know if everyone's talking about it. I don't know if anyone else is thinking about it. I just want to talk about it, fill your guys' brains with some ideas, and then you guys can come up with stuff and make up your own opinions of what's going on. But I've been really thinking about this whole love light stuff and where it's actually intersected with astrology. Because if you read why I love like Valens is so, well, just most traditional authors, they're so hardcore. It's like you'll read a couple of semi-positive things, but in contrast, there's so much negative stuff in astrology, and like all the traditional stuff is pretty much like, I don't want to say negative, but it's survival, really. But but we arrived here at the 21st century. We have astrology is just very like love and light, and of course I'm not saying this is like how everyone is either. Most people have kind of started to shy away from it. However, no one really addresses it like head on. And not everything's meant to be good. Like something I say a lot about, and a lot of astrologers say too, it's like people don't get into astrology because things are going easy for them, but usually it's something very traumatic, or like you have like your people who like, their mom was into it and they've been into it since a kid, or, whatever. But a lot of people usually get into it through some type of trauma, through some type of, trying to understand their identity, the understanding the events that have shaped their life. They usually come at it with a very, serious kind of thing. And, there's a lot of spiritual people, a lot of gurus that do the spiritual bypassing, which is just, it's one of those things where it's a fad. I think it'll eventually get washed out just because it's happening so much. But people just want to see things in the most positive way, right? Which I don't blame them. Life has just as many negatives as it does positives. But this Mars and why are we afraid of Mars and Saturn? Why are we afraid of malefic energy? Why are we afraid? Like, this is where, because it's just like, I feel like most people just look at Mars as like, oh, Mars, you're gonna get in a fight. Oh, it's bad. And then of course there's, Mars is your energy, but it's also like Mars is also like how you fight your battles in that sense where, but I guess my question is, at what point does that become a strength? At what point does Mars become actually helpful to the problem? Now, of course, you can go into all of the minor details of like, well, then you go into the zodiac sign that Mars is in, and what the ruler is in, and what sect is Mars in, and what house is it in, and all of that kind of good shit. But it's just like, I feel like there's, and this is, again, I'm really generalizing here in a sense, and of course not everyone feels this way. Something I really love about the astrology community is how completely individual everyone's experiences are, and I guess also not only their experiences but their perspective and how they share that. However, there's this kind of like, I would almost say like this undertow general consensus things, I feel like, with some of the astrology community. And the Mars and Saturn being a version, like a lot of people I feel like are scared of talking about negative stuff, scared about talking about bad stuff, really. And it's just not helpful. I think a lot of this Mars and Saturn stuff is very, like, a lot of you guys need discipline. A lot of you guys also need to stand up for yourselves. Very Mars Saturn stuff. A lot of you also need to, like Saturn, right? Cool it down. Not be Jupiter and do as much as you can. Not be Venus and just only indulge in what you want to enjoy. Mars and Saturn involves restriction. Mars and Saturn, and that's, where do you define when that's good? Like, when is that harmful and when is that, beneficial? It's the same thing with Venus and Jupiter. When is Venus beneficial and when is Venus not beneficial? Because there's so many examples where Venus and Jupiter aren't good. It's just one of those things where I think don't get me wrong, there's a rhyme and a reason for everything, right? Like Mars and Saturn are the bad planets, and that's fine. I'm not even trying to change that. I'm just trying to challenge the idea of like when are things that we find uncomfortable, right? Like Mars involves fighting. Not everyone really is comfortable with fighting, but it's a necessary part of it's a part of our experience, right? At what point do you shy away of the negative because it's negative versus embrace it because you have to deal with it? Like I'm not a death penalty person. However, I watched probably like a documentary, something about one of the doctors who performs the what do you call them? Passings of aways. I don't know what to call it. But and you talk to the doctor, and he's like, dude, someone's got to do it. He's like, someone's gonna put these people down, and I want to make sure it's a doctor that qualifies that actually giving them some care before they go, like at the bare minimum. And it's just like, for one, that's really cool, but I think you get someone like that who's like embracing something that's not an easy subject to talk about, and they're doing it in that healthy way. And I just look at some of the ways that we treat Mars and Saturn. Like in astrology, it's so easy to be like, everything's good, everything's great. Like I get comments on my YouTube all the time. They're like, you're kind of negative and like doom scoping. I'm like, have you not looked around? Like, am I wrong here in saying any of that? But also, Saturn's really realistic, right? Like, there's nothing like, I saw a headline earlier today about the rising COVID numbers in India, about this. And it's also it's really similar to like one of my favorite lyrics in this deathcore band, but it's like, death is the ultimate, like, comparison. It's the ultimate price. It's the ultimate how you really see everything. And it's like Mars and Saturn bring up those topics, right? Mars and Saturn reveal those realities. And again, where in astrology, it's really tempting to go easy on this positive stuff. And also see Mars and Saturn in a positive. I don't think there's nothing like, for example, like sobriety, right? Sobriety is such a good example for a lot of things. But like, for example, Saturn's going to rule that kind of stuff. Sobriety is good on paper. We want to be healthy. We want to be, in control of our habits, right? But that shit's hard work, and it is not easy. Like, there is nothing easy or fun about sobriety. It's good for you in the long run, but that's one of the examples of how I'm looking at Saturn is like, well, sure, that's a challenge and that's hard, and that can be for a lot of people a really big struggle. You know what I mean? But those virtues are good. At the end, at some point, right? They of course they lead to bad roads. That's what it's there for. But there's something good there, and I just personally think this. Excuse me. This connection with the love and light stuff. I think it's time to separate it. I talked about this in my last podcast. How I really think the astrology community, like we kind of just got roped in with the psychic new age community, and not that I don't know why, it's just like, I don't know, like, we got to start disassociating from them. We're something different. This is different. This isn't tarot. This isn't psychic readings. This isn't crystals. This isn't energy. This isn't chakras. Like, this is the planets and like shit like that. Anyway, so I was thinking about how I was thinking a lot about, why do we see Mars and Saturn as completely bad? Why don't more people embrace negative stuff in astrology? When does Mars and Saturn become good? But this is what I've thought. This is what I've thought about. Hold on, I've got some show notes here, and I wanted to make sure I go over everything I wanted to. I truly think, well, for one, This is where you're getting into a mixture, a combination of things. I think one, it's this mixture of the modern psychological astrology and versus the traditional stuff, which we're gonna kind of talk about. But I also think it has a little bit to do with it's just kind of where everything's at. So, well, this is what I was kind of thinking. So, what's funny is about like a lot of these like the older you go, the more hardcore the text gets. And this new age stuff that you read, stuff that was through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, which again, very influential for astrology. Astrology, got kind of brought in with the New Age movement, and there was like Carl Jung and all the free love movement. All of that kind of got brought in, which was, of course, there's a side to astrology that's really good, or a really good part of that that's helped astrology. Like I said in the other episode, and this is something I'm going to kind of almost echo here again, is, there are psychologists actually practicing astrology, looking to intertwine it, and they're doing good work, right? There's actually a lot of them too. However, there's this sense of, how do I want to say this? There's this sense of kind of like aversion to wanting to learn how things are. Like, okay, so people on Twitter will know that there's this whole, people would call it elitism. Others might call it gatekeeping, which is very funny. I don't have the time to break down why that's funny. But this gatekeeping attitude between the quote-unquote trad chads versus the modern psychological astrology, which, let's just say this. Everyone today practices modern astrology. We are here alive today. That's the definition of modern astrology. There are people who base their practice, and mind you, this is a practice for a reason, base their practice in the tradition or traditions, or even schools of thought, for example. And then there's people, and this is the thing where I don't have a problem with modern psychological astrology. And we're going to call it psychological because when you look at the books through the 67, like, for example, like one of my favorite modern psychological astrologers is like Dane Rudgier. Dude was like, you read his shit and you're like, I don't even know what this guy's talking about, but I just love hearing him riff. Very, very modern, very psychological. There's plenty of others too. I won't go into it. And all of their work is really great. And you have people that really dive into this type of astrology. One of my kind of issues with this astrology is that it's very side by side. It is separate, but it's side by side with this love and light, new age stuff that really, attaches a lot of mental gymnastics, I think, to astrology, which again, there's a beneficial side to the psychological stuff. And then where I think it is a struggle is, for some reason, people think, well, I don't want to say that. This is what I want to say. There are people that practice modern psychological astrology that are really in aversion to learning traditional stuff. And I don't know why. Like, I don't get that. I get that people don't practice the same astrology, but there's these people that are like, oh, like, I don't know if it's like they may feel insecure about not knowing, and they're just kind of like sticking to their guns, which is fine. But I don't understand the aversion to this, because this is, again, this is why I think there's also this kind of aversion to the like why Mars Saturn is bad, and why we only focus on the good. I think it's because nothing in life is simple, right? Everything's very complex, everything's intertangled, everything's interwoven. So I think it's a little bit of everything. But this is my idea. So I'd love to see what you guys have to say about this. But of course, there's this like class of we'll just call it, again, modern psychological astrologers. I don't know what else. You can say people who very modern, right? Not so much based in the traditional stuff. And for me, this is where, like, why? So this is the thing. I don't understand why people are so adverse to learning it, because when you talk about learning this stuff, because when you talk about, like, for example, like malefics and understanding why they're bad, understanding, why things are the way they are, I think that's very, like, something that we all should do, because this also leads into a topic that I'm going to try to close out on if I don't get ahead of myself, because in case you guys don't know me yet, you can clearly see that I like to talk in many different points, and I love you guys for still listening to me while I go off on many different tangents, but I always circle back to what I was trying to talk about, because I'm pretty good at that. But it's like traditional people, which they're called, I love the nickname trad chads because it's so funny. It's just like, it's there's this label of like pretentiousness with the traditional community, which, don't get me wrong, they're pretentious, me included, totally pretentious about it, and that's just the name of the game. That's life in the big city. but the psychological astrologers, the very modern ones, are so like, they don't want to learn. And the thing is, you don't need to read Valens and, whoever, you don't need to practice a certain way or be influenced at a certain time. My question is, why are people so turned off about learning the history? Because this is the thing. Astrology, the idea of a zodiac sign that we all, and when I say all, I mean that I'm generalizing here, that we all agree that there's 12 zodiac signs and that it goes, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, so on and so forth. That is ancient wisdom that's so far beyond any material in this century. In this, what's 1,000 years? Isn't that a century? I don't know. I think in astrology term times, the calendar isn't real. Wouldn't you want to learn where that comes from? Wouldn't you? Because for me, and this is why I share this, because this is my experience with astrology. And again, I know it sounds very Leo, and there's some people that are really averse to self-centeredness, but I can't speak for everyone else's experiences. I can only speak from my experience. However, when I share my experience, I learn that I'm not the only one that has that experience, and it makes other people feel heard and seen. So I'm going to be a Leo and say my story with how I got into this traditional stuff, because it's a really important thing. When you first get into astrology, I remember I thought I was a Cancer, and then I found out I was a Cancer Leo cusp. We'll talk about cusp later. I found a birth chart, and I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. I want to find more. I need to see more. Where can I get more? And this was in 2014, and at the time, this is what resources were online. And I say online because I'm a Gen Z, and I started online first before I went to a bookstore. Also, I lived in the Inland Empire, and at the time I lived in Yucaipa. And if anyone knows that, I don't think there was an astrology store there. There was only I think there's Dragon Marsh and Riverside I went to, which is barely a metaphysical store. It's much more of a D&D store in my opinion. But anyway, I went first online, and what you go online is you find your birth chart on astro.com. Or cafe astrology for most people, because that was just what trended first. You put in your birth chart, and you look up what's on cafe astrology. You look up what's on, Astrology King. I'm trying to think of other websites. And this isn't to bash them. They're great websites that they're starting, but that was it. There was no other information. And that's how it is when you get started into astrology. One of the fun, what I really like about also just educating myself on astrology is that it's hard information to find. You actually have to physically work to get involved in the astrology community. The day you first discover astrology versus when you're learning about other teachers and shit like that, it's you have to it takes a lot of effort, and I thought it's rewarding effort in my opinion. But you find this stuff, and there's only so much stuff available until and this was also, I had been on Twitter for a long time, and I had been following some astrologers, some astrology stuff, and of course that didn't really start blowing up till 2014, 15, and then that's when a good amount of people came there, and then of course over the past few years it's just been blowing up. But there wasn't that many resources besides the more modern stuff, and I mean finding books, if I didn't live in a major city, right? So it's not I had really access or nor what books to find. So I used I did what I could. And that was fine. Now, I always, though, have literally yearned for a deeper knowledge of astrology. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, because I think that's part of the magic of astrology, is looking at a birth chart and going, what the fuck does this mean? There's something magical about it. There's something you look at a chart and you go, and this is why, it's yours, right? That's your chart, and that's what the universe has to say about you at your time, right? That's the concept. There's something so magical about that, and there's something magical about not knowing. And it turns into this fire of I need to learn more. And that's why we're all here. None of us are listening. I'm not talking to this microphone, and you guys are not listening to me talking to this microphone because you were oh, this is okay. Let me just casually listen to astrology. It was no, you probably had some type of experience that made you go, damn, this is pretty crazy. And now you're hooked because, of course, it's real as shit and you should defend it because it's fucking super helpful. But anyway, that's besides the point. For me personally, I wanted more info so fucking bad. And really, all of that changed when I listened to the astrology podcast, which right now, okay, I'm going to credit where credit's due. Where a lot of this community would not be where it's at without Chris Brennan. There's people that are listening to this right now that don't even know who Chris Brennan is, that they wouldn't even have, like, Chris Brennan truly, in my opinion, was this huge force when it comes to astrological information. The Astrology Podcast, for those who aren't familiar, is, I would assume, the biggest astrology podcast. If there's one bigger, I don't know. Or at least, well, maybe there is one bigger. I don't know. Chris Brennan, he's got a big history. Really big astrologer. He got the Astrology Podcast and pretty much started putting out episodes on everything. And what I try to tell people is, like, he's kind of like when you go to, like, hiking and they have the big poles and it's like, you know, Venice, 1,000 miles this way, Berlin, 1,000 miles this way, Tokyo, 1,000 miles this way. It's like, that's almost like what the Astrology Podcast is for, like, people who want to get into, like, the astrology club, I guess, where it's like, because I say the astrology club because, not to say that there's gatekeeping, but it's a language. Like, I feel bad for the people who, like, want to get into it and, like, because they're excited, but they just got into it, so they don't know any language, because it is a language barrier at first. But it's like, once you get past that language barrier and you get it more, like, the podcast is this perfect place. And, like, I remember when I first discovered the podcast, which everyone, like, I feel like everyone's got their story with the Astrology Podcast, because that's really, for a lot of people, it's not like that now because I feel like there's so much astrology content. But I mean, Chris Brennan was kind of it when it came to the traditional stuff. However, for a lot of people, including me, that was the first taste I got of, like, oh, there's other stuff besides the A to Z horoscope maker. There's other stuff besides, you know, I have this one of my first astrology books was this one, and no disrespect, it's a fine book, but in comparison, it's like with what you get versus, like, you know, with even just like one, like, just learning essential dignities versus like one whole book, it's like, how much value do you get out of that? And when I first discovered the podcast, I was like, holy shit, there's so much here. There's so much I didn't know. There's so much to be aware of. And that was exciting for me. Now, with the traditional stuff, though, you know, you start hearing new stuff and you go, and again, this is my, like, I was already practicing astrology. I was doing a lot of it. Like, I was very familiar with, I knew how all the stuff worked, but I didn't know where it was rooted, right? I didn't know the source information, like the source stuff. And then I met Chris, which, God bless Chris's heart, because when I first met Chris, I met him off Twitter, actually. This is back when there was no astrology Twitter. It was like I moved to Denver. He was in Denver. I found the astrology meetup online because I wanted to meet people. And then I met Chris, and then I was like really passionate about astrology, and I didn't know anything about it. And I told him, I was like, I said something crazy along the lines of like how I think astrology works and my ideas and dreams for it. And I pretty much sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about, right? Which, he still listened to me, never judged me, right? And from there, that's when, like, you know, my first lecture was also like the ruler of the nativity from like Anonymous of 397 or 482, whatever random year it is. Anyway, met him, and then it wasn't until, and I had listened to the podcast a little bit, I was like getting more into podcasts in general, because again, that's also like when podcasts started getting more and more bigger. Like, it all happened all at the same time. That's what's also interesting about this astrology nexus that we're at. It's all happening all at once. But then it wasn't until, so you guys will think this is funny, because don't you love when a planet, like when someone just really shows, like a transit happens and you just see the transit in real life? Like, for example, like when me and Chris text, usually when he texts me, it's like right when it's Saturn hour. And it's like, of course, Chris is ruled by Saturn. But anyway, it was December. This was December of 2017. I went back to Denver for a wedding. And at the time, I met up with Chris. And this is right when his book came out. And he gave me a copy. And this is right as Mercury and Saturn conjoined at 29 Sag and Mercury stationed retrograde. This was right on my ascendant. That was pretty much right when I learned, you know, anybody also too, for those listening and you don't know who Chris Brennan is, author of Hellenistic Astrology, Study of Fate and Fortune, available in fine bookstores everywhere. Buy the book, number one, because it's pretty much the best roadmap you can get, in my opinion, as far as understanding the context of modern Western tropical astrology. You'll understand pretty much the foundations and the bones, the bare bones, and way more past that. But Chris gave me his book, and I remember reading it, and I felt very, how do I say? It made me feel, I went, whoa, there's a lot of things I don't know, but it made me even more hungry for information. It made me want to, it made me want to learn more, take on more. And again, and this is why I question where there's there's good modern astrologers, because modern looks a lot of different ways, but there's this like flavor and this attitude as if like they don't have to learn it, which again, it wasn't accessible for a long time. If you guys don't know about Project Hindsight, which it blows my mind how many people don't know about Project Hindsight. Project Hindsight is the reason we're all kind of here, in my opinion. Just for those who don't know, it was pretty much a thing in the 90s where a bunch of astrologers self-funded a research group where they started translating ancient Greek texts and pretty much a bunch of horoscopes from thousands of years ago that no one had ever done. That was like in the 90s. Chris Brennan was a big part of that. And again, the other thing too that a lot of people that are listening may not be aware of, that astrology is a lineage. Like, teachers are taught by other teachers that are taught by other teachers that goes on and on and on and on. So like this whole lineage teacher stuff is really, again, this is why I question a lot of the modern astrologers that are not that, if you're not familiar with all this stuff, that's fine. It's the people that are in aversion to learning it and like embracing its rich 2, 4, 5,000 year history. Like why would you put that on the shelf? Like what? I don't know. That's just, for people to be like, oh, well, I don't need to learn the traditional stuff and trying to gatekeep. It's like, dude, no, it's like, I wasn't always like this. I got into the modern stuff, and it wasn't until I got introduced to it, and I was like, oh my God, this is what I was looking for. But again, it's all of these little moving parts. Now, I understand when there wasn't that info, but like, here's the thing. You got people like, well, for one, this is why I also say to listen to Chris's podcast, because and this is why I call it this kind of roadmap as to where to go, because there's an episode on every little tiny topic you can think of in astrology. There is, I mean, from all the way from the oldest stuff to, he gets into like heated debates with people, which is really funny to listen to. It's like just something about like a really stone cold like debate about astrology is like through the astrology podcast. Because what I love about the astrology podcast too is it's so like I call it the NPR for astrology. It's something so like, it's boring, but in an entertaining way, and it's so fun. And that's no offense to Chris if he's listening to this. It's a very fun podcast. It's just so, it's good. It's raw. Anyway, now that the information's here, why would you be an aversion to that? Why wouldn't you want to go more into that? That's just, I think, my question. And again, and Chris has, just a video on every little thing. And now what I wanted to talk about, and this is where I wanted to end, because I also think all of this kind of mixes in together with this. One of my favorite episodes of the podcast is episode 250. It's Alan White. It's his introduction into Hellenistic astrology. When I listened to this last year when Chris posted it, it just blew my mind, because it's just, you know, when someone says something that just like validates something you had thought but you never like said out loud, or you didn't know, like that's how I felt a lot about this podcast. Alan talks a lot about just things you hadn't heard before, and it's one of my favorite podcasts because for one, he's also like I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong on this, so I'm pretty sure he said he was a Vietnam vet, or he was in the military, Green Beret. And it's just like, I love hearing someone with like that type of life experience talk about astrology. It's a very refreshing type of voice because it's a very specific voice. The reason I like this podcast so much is because Alan White, I think, really defines something that it really defines something for me that I really think is kind of the overarching, what I truly think is a potential problem. Now, you guys know I'm a Libra moon. I'm going to see the good and bad to both sides, right? So I'm not afraid of that. And that's also to say the bad about traditional astrology. Like the fact that like you don't need to learn, again, you don't need to learn all of the technical stuff to know what you're doing with this stuff, right? Like, it's literally, astrology is just like interpreting life for the most part. Like, if you've got good life experience, good for you. You don't got to learn all the technical stuff. And there is a downside to it, right? Like, that's the funny part about learning traditional is you get really excited about a new text to read, and it's just the same shit over and over again. Like, every astrology book is the same thing over and over again, except there's like one paragraph that makes this book special than the other one. So again, it's really only for like the nerds out there that really like that kind of technical stuff. But you don't have to get all the way into the traditional stuff. But what I think one of these overarching problems is, and this is what Alan White talks about, which I had mentioned this Alan White podcast before. If you guys aren't familiar with the Astrology Show, Kira Taborn's podcast, you guys should check her out. Shout out to Kira for sure. She has a really wonderful show, podcast where it's astrology related. She talks about pretty much everything along with planets, signs, has a ton of great astrologers on it too, including your boy. But I was on an episode with her, and it's the episode we talk about the sun. And I mentioned this podcast because Alan White, this is the first I'd ever heard of it, and I still need to look into this more because I was so fascinated by it. But he talks about how in certain, and I've talked a lot about this, of how in certain lines, certain traditions, like the moon never ruled Cancer, and that the sun actually ruled Cancer, and that the moon never actually ruled anything. But what he also talks about is that astrologers are not therapists. We're astrologers. And now this is going to sound a little, I think, maybe counterintuitive to what, I mean, I was even talking about like last week. And then also I was like on the Cosmic Keys podcast not that long ago. You guys should check that out. But this, there are a lot of, again, there are actual astrologers out there who are licensed, keyword licensed, therapists and psychologists that are using astrology into their practice, getting great results, changing people's lives like great people. But then there's also what I feel, and this is where, and this is, again, this is just something to notice, right? There's no right or wrong here, but it's an observation I would like to make and see how other people feel about this. But I feel like there's a certain, and this isn't to anyone specific, actually. I can't think of anyone specifically. I just see it a lot of the time where it's like astrology's promoted into this brand of therapy that's not that. And I think a lot of astrologers really try to play therapist or like pretend to be therapists. And don't get me wrong, astrology is super therapeutic. Astrology is a therapy. But I think intertwining talk therapy, depth psychology, all that kind of crazy shit that people with degrees do, and combining that with astrology in this sense where you get people, and don't get me wrong, I think astrology is going to be a tool where we're going to be able to help people in ways that they haven't been able to be helped before, in my opinion. Because we're going to be able to talk and discuss about things in ways that haven't been done before. So I'm not discouraging different ways of going into astrology at all. But we're not therapists. And I think when you are in the seat of an astrologer and you're trying to put on your therapist cap, I think that's where you run into problems where you talk about the Mars and Saturn. Because this is also another question where, now a lot of you are probably going to misunderstand me here. So I'm going to say it as clearly as I can, even though you're totally going to hear me wrong. This idea of ethics, right? Yes, people should be ethical. Yes, you should, like, I'm not saying don't be a good person. Don't be be a professional when it comes to this stuff. It's just, I think the idea of a conversation about ethics in astrology is really funny to me. As if, we are the ultimate authority, as if we know what is good and wrong in any situation, right? Because it's, had a couple months ago in 2020, I got a lot of shit for this, but I made I did a YouTube video. I did my weekly horoscope where I pretty much yelled at all of the Trump QAnon people. And I told them to get off my fucking YouTube channel. People were like, "You're bringing politics into this," and blah 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 blah. And the reason I said that is because I'm over here saying there's this great new beginning with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I don't want these crazy people to, let's say storm the Capitol and let's say get on TV and then say, oh, the astrology guy on YouTube told me that the stars are aligning for this moment. I try to really not have that, right? But when we try to, I think, be anything other than an astrologer, I think when we try to what's the word I'm looking for here? Again, it's not that we can't help people and that we're not in this certain position, but it's like, we don't know what people are going to do with the information that we have. Like, there's so many clients that I've done, and this is a hard, and people don't talk about the hard parts about being an astrologer. Like, I might just talk about that the next episode. Don't mark my word on it. I'll have to remember to write it down. But being an astrologer, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing, in my opinion, duty and an amazing thing to be for people, but it's very difficult with some of the things you do. And one challenge is when you do your best to really explain something from a non-biased way, from a really just fucking pick up what I'm putting down, and it's just they don't listen to you and they want to hear what they want to hear. This is why I made that comment of the Trump people queuing on, get away from me, because I don't want them to hear what they want to hear when I talk and then do something off of that, right? And I think where this blending of therapists, wannabe therapists, wannabe therapists. A lot of these people aren't licensed or trained. Maybe they took a couple classes in psychology and now want to start playing with people's subconscious. It's just and now for me, where I fall in the line is you guys know me. I talk a lot about I really like personal development stuff, right? And a lot of the astrology language is very similar to a lot of the therapy language, but I think there's also a distinction with the intention that you go into with the reading, right? I don't go into my readings thinking that I'm going to be this person's therapist. We're going to have a breakthrough moment. It's not my job to, again, this is why I don't therapy is not always really effective in rehashing people's trauma. That's not my job. I'm not even trained in that. Now, of course, I'm responsible for what I say and how I say it. And I think I was just, I was thinking about this code of ethics thing, because this gets me back to ethics, because astrologers are really big on this isn't ethical to talk about in astrology. It's bro, we're literally looking at someone's whole life. Is it ethical for me to, if you really want to ask an ethical question, this is for the real fucking astrologers out there that do this shit. Is it even ethical to look at someone's zodiacal releasing? Tell me. Is it even ethical to look at someone's annual perfections in 10 or 12 years? How is that not ethical? Is it ethical for me to tell someone how their life is going to go based off what these calculations say, right? So I think this because then people also too, it's when people are when someone dies and then someone will pull up the chart and it's that's too soon, it's unethical. It's what the fuck do you think we're here for? Don't get me wrong. I think maybe wait a day or two. You could look at it at that moment, and I think when people post about it, of course, there's the clickbait type thing, but it's also that's where astrologers aren't here to point to the roses and daisies and say, isn't that good? We're supposed to go, yeah, life's really fucked up, and we're going to do our best that we can to minimize the damage. So this concept, this idea of ethics, why this is again, there's no such thing as original ideas out there. Where this came to me from is originally I was getting into I was learning more about the public school system, and there's this book called something along the lines of pretty much school is stupid, we should get rid of school, and pretty much school has made kids worse. And it's a pretty again, it's one of those things where you first hear that really challenges everything that you've heard before, and you get a little defensive, and then you read into it and you're wow, there's a lot of solid points with that. And I don't know, I'm going to have to find this again. And I tried to find this before this, but it was one of those things where it was too vague to look up. But there was something about this idea of ethics where someone was this idea of ethics of everyone trying to be a good person. It's it's really weak ground, right? It doesn't hold a lot of weight. And I think in astrology, astrologers are so careful about ethics because we think that we're therapists. Like, I'm an astrologer. If I see that you're possibly, like, for example, I got a client with the 8th house transit. Now, for me personally, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, like, this person's going to die and fear, and blah, 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 blah. Like, but I'm going to be like, yo, this is happening. This is what you should prepare for. This is what it can look like. And as much as I would love to put it in the easiest way possible for someone, my job is to communicate it, not package it up in a way that's going to be okay for that person. Now, that's, of course, we need to all have our communication skills as professionals, as consultants. But I also think, in my opinion, because again, people will hear whatever they want to hear. Right? I'm sure, and I'm guilty of that too. It's like when you argue, like, you ever been in an argument with someone, you just know that every word you say is going over your head. Maybe a lot of you guys aren't even listening. They're just checked out right now, and now you're checking back in because I said it. But this idea of knowing what's right and wrong, or this idea of, I think this idea of us pretending to be therapists is not, it's shaky water, and I think we're just kind of like playing on a minefield, and we're not realizing that it's there. Or maybe I just think there's maybe some more potential pitfalls with that. But it's like, my job is to communicate efficiently what the chart says. Now, if the chart says something hard, that's a hard thing to do as an astrologer, and I think, I feel like, no astrologer's just going to sit there and just go crazy and say some like crazy fucked up shit, right? Like, at least I don't think so. There are a lot of crazy people that are astrologers, so I can't say that for certain. Now, when it comes to ethics, I want to say this because I'm an ethic person. Now, this is not a plug at all. I brought this book because no one knows about this book. I've seen one person talk about it, and it was when they gave it to me. And it was like Chris and Lisa. I was hanging out with Chris and Lisa, and they gave me this book that there's a bunch of contributors, like fucking Stephen Forrest, Dana Young, Frank Clifford, Ann Ortelli. They're all contributors to this book, The Professional Astrologer. And I read the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics is actually like the first couple pages, which, again, if you're like if you want to become a practicing astrologer, this book, by the way, for the people that are listening, this is The Professional Astrologer, Building a Successful Astrology Practice. It's compiled by the Organization for Professional Astrology, otherwise known as OPA. If you guys get on the weird part of YouTube where you watch car accidents from Russia, one of my favorite things is say OPA. But anyway, that little side bit about me. But anyway, this book, and I believe ISAR, which I don't know ISAR's acronym, International Society of Astrological Research. That's what it is, something along those lines. They have a code of ethics that, for the most part, I agree with, right? It's very simple stuff. But I also would just question this idea of, when it comes to ethics, we have to be really clear about what is our intent, right? We only know what's going to be right and wrong when we understand what the mission is, what the goal is. And this is why I'm referring to this Alan White podcast, because like, he makes a good point. Like, we're astrologers, we're not therapists. And don't get me wrong, this is therapeutic. There are therapists that are putting in astrology. I think they belong together. Astrology and psychology, in my opinion, are kind of like a yin-yang situation. But I also think that, especially too when it comes to how you're viewing your own astrology, right? Trying to paint everything in love and light, you don't have to do that. That's not, it's the same thing. Well, I don't want to say that's the same thing in therapy. I think a lot of, because there's no perfect human being, which again, that's the other thing with astrologers. It's like this game of ethics and this game of like what's right, what's wrong. It's like, astrologers aren't perfect. We're just human beings. We're going to mess up. In fact, if you are going into an astrology reading thinking this person's perfect and that they're going to give it to you perfectly, you are literally fucking everything up from the get-go. You're ruining it all. So don't expect things to be perfect. I would hope they have maybe a little expectation that things are good, but try not to hold expectations. You'll be mildly blown away if you don't. But I truly think that this question of what's right, what's wrong, we can open this up a little bit more. And I think that's only because, like, astrology is what it is. And it's not therapy. It's astrology. And sometimes the planets have, and this is what is good, is like sometimes it's going to say something bad, which again, that doesn't. The thing is with therapy is that it's always trying to do things in a good way, and that's good, right? A lot of people, we're all trying to be better, again, right? We're all trying to progress, we're all trying to grow. That's the name of the game. What makes astrology powerful is that it validates that not every day is a growth day. Some days you go down a few notches, and we're going to be able to see when those are. We're going to be able to see where it's coming from. We're going to see why. We're going to see when it's going to end and when you're actually going to be able to go back up again. But that isn't, soft. Like, certain realities aren't easy. Certain realities, and it's also too, I also think too, again, it's back to the ethical question. Is it ethical with us for us to withhold information about someone's birth chart? I'm sure, again, this is not the first time this question has been asked. I'm sure if people have answered it, but I just don't think it gets talked about nearly enough. And so I would ask you, is it ethical for me to withhold information because maybe it's unethical for me to talk about this to this person, right? And so these aren't easy questions. These aren't easy situations. And what I'm not trying to say, ethics are bad, don't, do whatever the fuck you want, or that, ethics are amazing and go by the rules. But lately I've been in this. Everything. It's so weird. I swear to God, I just talked about this. I record too many videos by myself that I don't know what video I talk about what in anymore. But it's just everything you learn is wrong. And I feel like you hit a certain age and it's just like every year you learn about something that it's just like, nope, that was wrong too. That was a lie. That was a misconception. You were sold, And it's just everything's so wrong. And the only way you can figure out what's wrong and right is by questioning it. And it's easy to not question things. You know what I mean? It's easy to go with the flow. And right now too, Saturn's opposite my Mercury, right now, which I'm really enjoying because again, I'm a day chart. I really like Saturn. I do like Saturn. What I don't like about it though is that Mercury rules my 10th house of career, zodiacally speaking, not my midheaven. So I get a little anxious about me talking, right? Like Saturn opposite, this is my second time recording this podcast episode. I feel much better about my ideas and how I got it out this time. But Saturn opposite my Mercury right now is I feel very I need to be clear about what I'm saying. I need to be clear about what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it. Something that has really captivated me lately is this idea of, and I've been saying it, of there's no original ideas. And it's what was it? There's been a few things recently that was I learned, I had a way I thought about something and then I learned differently. And then I asked, I was where did that idea even come from? That wasn't my thought. It's when you read something online and you put it subconscious, you don't even think about it. And then that topic comes up later and all of a sudden you have an opinion about it, even though that's not even your opinion. It's someone else's opinion, but it's yours now because I don't know how the brain works. That's something that, because there's been so many things where it's just I thought that way. And this is, a lot of people can relate to this with childhood programming. It's when you find the way that you were programmed as a child, you become an adult, you see that other things are different. And of course it looks different throughout the ages. For me though, at this moment, it's just been wow, I really need to question everything. And I consider myself a very, I've been questioning everything for a long time. It's not like you're watching me for the first time question reality. I would hope you would guys assume that this isn't my first rodeo. But man, it's layers and layers deep of a lot. And so when Saturn, I'm ranting about myself here, but with Saturn opposite my Mercury, it's just questioning of what thoughts are mine and what thoughts are other people's. Mercury and Leo opposite Saturn and Aquarius. And the thing is with Saturn and Aquarius is there's times where you are going to be in a group mindset and you're going to be with the group when you don't realize it. and you're going to realize that you don't want to be in that situation a lot of the time. So for me, and so this is why I talk about like the therapy role in astrology. This is why I'm talking about why are malefics even bad? Why are they bad? You know what I mean? Why isn't that good? You know, why are we all love and light and bullshit in astrology? And why aren't we real as fuck? You know what I mean? And this is why I wanted to do this episode this way, because I think all of these topics, although they're all completely individual, they all really, I feel like, have the same underlying, they're all floating on the same boat, or they're all, you know, connected with each other in this weird way. And I think a lot of it also comes from like, you know, these are all other people's ideas, and these aren't our ideas. You know what I mean? So I think where do we need to detach ourselves from like what everyone else says versus and this is why I fucking love that Alan White podcast, because he talks about the fucking sun. And I know I'm saying fuck a lot because now I'm getting real serious about this, because I love astrology, and I love this type of shit. I love learning. I love questioning things, and I love seeing a different way to see things that make more sense. Like, that's why I love astrology, right? It's a different way to see things that just makes more sense. And Alan White talks about, and I talk about this. If you want to hear me rant about this, I feel like much more with clarity, listen to Kira's podcast, The Astrology Show. But you know, Alan White talks about that, well, in some traditions, the moon doesn't rule Cancer, because why would the moon rule Cancer? The moon goes really fast. The moon's never in a sign for longer than 2 days. Like, the moon doesn't rule anything, and that it's the sun that technically rules Cancer, because, you know, this is where the summer solstice begins. This is where, you know, like, the sun gets the brightest, so why wouldn't the sun rule that? And it's just like, yeah, I like that. Like, why don't we use that? Don't get me wrong, there's the theme of Monday, and then for all the actually people out there that are going to go off about the comments, which do, if you know why we give the moon Cancer and not the sun Cancer instead of the other way around, please let me know. Please let me know, actually, because I think other people would like to know too. And you'll get a bunch of likes, which will make you feel good. But I like that, where it was new information that really... It was new information that was a different way of seeing things. It wasn't too far. It challenged the system, but it was just enough to make you go, wow, that makes so much more sense. And then you go, well, that makes more sense. Why are we doing it the other way if this makes more sense? And then you go, what else am I doing that is much more difficult, or that can make more sense? You know what I mean? And so I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys off today with. I can't believe I got a whole an hour podcast to this thing. I don't know how many single podcasts I've got in me. Like, is this? I didn't realize what I signed up for. Now with Saturn stationing on my Mercury, but this is where I wanted to come from with this podcast. It's just like, question this shit, man. Question this shit. Look at things through a different perspective, because it's only going to help clarify your position of things. It's only going to help you be more clear about what you're doing, how you see things, and it's just gonna help you. So, I think that's what I've got for you guys this episode. Like I said before, if you want early access to episodes and want to help support the show, become a patron at patreon.com/CamWhiteAstro. Follow me on all my social medias if you dare. This show is now available on Apple Podcasts, and it says it's on Spotify somewhere, but I don't see it. So maybe it's in the cloud. Maybe you guys see it and I don't. Find it on Spotify for me, maybe. If you see it, let me know. And I think that's everything I wanted to talk about today. So I'll leave you guys off with that, and I will be seeing you next time.